Good morning. We are beginning Maseches. We're beginning today with Maseches Shekalim. We are in Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav. We're going to learn today the Mishnah, and that will conclude Perek Vav. Maseches Shekalim has two more prokim to it, Perek Zayin and Perek Ches, which we're going to hold off on. We'll make a siyah. We're going to hold off on for a little while, and we'll dedicate the shiurim for the remainder of this week. We have to see whether there'll be a shiur on Thursday, but the remainder of the shiurim during this week we'll dedicate to Rosh Hashanah and the tefillah on Rosh Hashanah and understanding the tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, particularly in light of the Ramchal that we have been learning in the Das Tavunos. The Ramchal himself wrote Nemuke HaMachzor. He wrote a pirush on many different parts of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur Tefillah, and some of these will help us understand the Das Tavunos, and the Das Tavunos will help us understand the commentary on the Machzor, and I believe they'll make the Tefillah for each of us more meaningful when we understand not just the literal words that we're saying, but actually the meaning of Malchi, Zechronos, and Shofaros, that long Shmona Esrei on Rosh Hashanah Musa. So we're going to take a look at today Shekalim Perek Vav Mishnah Vav. We had learned that there are 13 Shulchanos, 13 Shefaros, 13 Paroches in the Beis Hamikdash. We went through the 13 Shulchanos, we went through the 13 curtains, we went through the 13 collection boxes, the shofaros. 6 of the shofaros were for Nedava, and 5 of them, 5 of the 6 Nedava boxes had on them written a Nedava for what. So if a person dedicated 100 shekel to buy a carbon chatos, he went into the marketplace and only spent 98 shekel. The other 2 shekel he put in the shofar in the Beis Hamikdash that said Moser Chatas, leftover money from a korban Chatas. And there was a Moser Asham, etc. At some given point, the Gizbar would open these boxes, these 6 boxes, and all the money would be used to buy animals that would go for a korban ola, which means it's the whole animal gets consumed on the Mizbeach, with the exception of the animal hide that is given to Kohanim. A carbanola, no one eats from a carbanola, not the owners who brought the carbon, not the Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash, no one eats from it. Kohanim only get the hide. So that's what those 6 boxes that say Nedava. There are 7 other boxes we learned about. Then there are 6 boxes that say Nedava, and the Nedava there's leftover Chatas money, leftover Asham money. There are 5 such boxes. The 6th box simply said on it Nedava. Somebody wants to donate money to the Beis Hamikdash. It's not leftover money from any carbon. He just walks into the Beis Hamikdash. He'd like to leave a Nedava for the Beis Hamikdash. He puts it into the Nedava box, and those are the 6 of the 13 Nedava boxes. So now that we're on the subject of donations, the Mishnah, Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav, is going to continue discussing donations. Ha'omer, this is page 50 in your Mishnah Behira. Ha'omer harei alai eitzim. Somebody says, harei alai, I take it upon myself to bring wood to the Beis Hamikdash. He doesn't say anything about money. He takes it upon himself to bring wood to the Beis Hamikdash. What does he do? So, la yifchos mishnei gizrin. Remember, we learned in Masechta Tamid that every morning there was a special mitzvah. Besides the maracha, they brought wood to the maracha for the maracha gedola, where animals were consumed. They had the maracha shel ketores, which created coals, and these coals were taken inside the heichel for the mizbeach haktores to burn the ketores on. And then there was the maracha Eish Tamid, the Marocha that just was there for the purpose basically of keeping a fire going 24/7 on the Mizbeach. And winner of Lottery 1, who did the Trumas Hadeshen, he was also given the privilege of setting up the logs of the 3 Marochot. He couldn't schlep the logs all the way to the Mizbeach. A Kohanim brought the logs to the Mizbeach, and he had the privilege of setting up the logs. Besides setting up those logs, all the logs are now set up in the 3 Marochot on the Mizbeach. There's another mitzvah of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, 2 pieces of wood, they're almost like squares, that the Kohen who won the first pious threw on to the Marocha Gedola. After the Marocha Gedola was set up, the large set of logs to consume animals, and the Marocha Gedola was lit. Now the Kohen who won the first lottery threw these 2 square pieces of wood on to the Mizbeach. So that's the mitzvah. I'm just reminding everybody of Shnei Gezirin. But that's not the Gezirin that we're talking about here. Here the Mishnah used the word Gezirin in terms of logs. Now, remember we learned Masechta Tamid that the way it looked like Lincoln logs, lahavdil. It was Lincoln logs, and they went in 2 different directions, and it created like a Lincoln log house. And that's what the Marocha Gedola looked like. And it was made up of logs. And these logs are also called Gezirin. So if someone says, the Mishnah says, Ha'omer harei alai eitzim, if someone says, I take it upon myself to bring wood to the Beis HaMikdash, lo yifchos mishnei gizrin. He shouldn't give anything less than, when he brings the wood to the Mizbeach, he has to bring 2 gizrim. If you take a look at picture 55, they're showing you a minimal of 2 logs. How big were these 2 logs? So there was a shear, the Rab says it was shear known in the Beis HaMikdash, how large these logs were. So that's what a log looks like. We know what a log looks like. Levona, somebody says, I take it upon myself to bring levona, a type of incense or spice, to the Beis HaMikdash, and this was an incense, a spice that was used to bring a korban mincha. It was brought with the flour offering. So someone is not donating a flour offering. He says, I take it upon myself to bring levona. Lo yivchos mikometz. He can't donate less than a kometz levona. You take a look at picture 56. This is the famous kometz rule in the Beis HaMikdash. A person brings a korban mincha. People can bring flour offerings. They can bring animals. They can bring birds. They can bring flour offerings. A person brings a flour offering. He brings a certain amount of flour. The Torah tells you the measurement. The Kohen takes his fist. He puts it into the flour and does something that looks like this, which is picture 56. And what happens is there's a certain amount of flour that's going to come out from the bottom of his 3 closed fingers. And when it's finished coming out, whatever's now left in that palm, that's burned on the Mizbeach. That's called the kometz. All the other flour that never got into the palm, all that belongs to the Kohen, and he could, of course it's hegdish. He has to eat it b'tores hegdish, but he can bake it into a challah, whatever he's going to do, and it belongs to the Kohen. The kometz, what's held in those 3 fingers, is what is burnt on the Mizbeach. The same thing is true for levona. If someone says, Harei alai levona, I take it upon myself to bring levona, he brings a certain amount of levona to the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohen puts his fist in there. He goes like this. That's the amount of levona you have to bring. That's the amount that satisfies your obligation when you say Harei alai levona. Zahav. Someone says, I'm going to bring gold to the Beis Hamikdash. Now here the Rav on page 51 in the right-hand side explains the Mishnah means somebody says, I'm going to bring a gold coin to the Beis Hamikdash. And there could be all kinds of different coins. There could be a half shekel gold coin. It could be a shekel gold coin. It could be a 10 shekel gold coin. But we're talking about coins. So someone says, I'm going to bring a gold coin to the Beis Hamikdash. Lo yifchos mi dinar zahav. The coin that he brings to the Beis Hamikdash cannot be less than a dinar zahav, a certain weight which has a certain value. That's the minimum amount. If someone, the Rav explained, says, I will bring gold, he doesn't say a gold coin, he just says gold. So the Rav says on page 51, right-hand column, before the words Osham, maybe afilu tzinoira shukim min mazle cotton. You can bring even a small amount of gold. And the Rav gives an example, a tiny little gold fork. When you buy a set of silverware, you have your fork, your knife, your spoon, and then you have very small, like dessert knives. And you also get very small dessert spoons. So the Rav says even this tiny fork, which has not that much gold in it, is also okay. So if somebody says, I take it upon me to bring a gold coin, it can't be less than a dinar zahav. If someone says, I take it upon me to bring gold, he can bring something that's the value of a tiny little vessel of gold. Now the Mishnah is going back to what we learned about last week. There are 13 of these Shotharos collection boxes, and 6 of them have the word Nedava written on it. Again, 6 of them have Nedava. 5 of those 6 specifically say where the Nedava is coming from. Leftover Chatas money Nedava, leftover Asher money Nedava, leftover Korban Nazir money Nedava. Then there's a box that just says Nedava. People want to just give to the Beis HaMikdash. She Shala Nedava. So the Mishnah now says, you told me that there are 6 boxes that are for Nedava. Nedava mehayoisaba. What do you do with what does the Gizba do with the money that's in the Nedava box? It doesn't go to Bedek Habayis. It does not go to the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. The upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, you go to that special room, and we learned about the Lishkat HaKelim. You put the vessel in there. If you want to donate money to the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, you can give it to the Gizbar. There's a different way to do it as well. But if you want to put money into the Nedava box, the 5 boxes say leftover Chatas, leftover Ashim, etc. But 1 box just says Nedava. That is not money that's going to go to the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. It's going to go to pay for general Korban Ola. Remember, we learned about there's such a thing as Hayetz Mizbeach. Sometimes the Mizbeach was not occupied, so they would bring Korbanos to occupy the Mizbeach. So the Nedava, the box that just says Nedava without explanation, if you put money in there, it is going to go to buy a Korban Ola. What do they do with the money? They purchased animals to use to bring a korban ola. Habasar lashem, the meat, the whole animal, is consumed and goes to Hashem. It's an ola. Ola means to go up. All of it goes up to Hashem. Ve'ha'oros, but the hides, la kohanim. It goes to the kohanim. Now, how do we know that that's what you should do with all these pushkas? There's a pushka that says on it leftover chatas money. There's a pushka that says on it leftover asha money. There's a pushka that says on it leftover korban nazir money. All these pushkas are named in between page 49 and page 50 in the Rav. How do you know that all this money should be a korban ola, where the whole animal goes to Hashem, and only the hides go to the Kohen? Why don't we use all the money for a korban shlomim? So that part of it goes to Hashem, and part of it a kohen can eat. How do we know that all of this is ola money? Zeh medrash dorash Yehoyada kohen gadol. Keep this in mind. Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav of Shekalim. Very, very, very rare. I didn't do a search. I don't have access to one of those computer Shas libraries. But I personally have not come across another place where we have a drasha. We get drashas quoted from Rabbi Akiva, drashas quoted from Rabbi Yeshua, etc. All the Tanoim. We have all these drashas. We have all these drashas that are quoted by Tanoim, sometimes quoted by Amoraim. This is a drasha that we're getting all the way back from Yehoyada, the Kohen Gadol, who was during the first Beis Hamikdash. We have a drasha here of a pasuk that goes all the way back. Now, all our drashas come through a Messiah. Rabbi Akiva didn't make anything up. Rabbi Elazar didn't make anything up. Rabbi Akiva heard it from his Rebbe, who 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 heard it from Yeshua ben Nun, who heard it from Moshe Rabbeinu. So if that's the case, how do we have a machlokes? Rabbi Akiva says this and Rabbi Eliezer says this. Okay, so that's a shaila where machlokes comes from. Completely different subject. But we're not making things up. We're basing things on a Messiah, a transmission from Moshe Rabbeinu. So most of what we see in Mishnayos, we get Tanoim. In Gemara, we get Amoraim. We rarely, if ever, I don't know if there's another place like this, have a drasha from the Kohen Gadol in the first Beis Hamikdash. Now we know that that in the first Beis Hamikdash they knew obviously Torah Shebaal Peh, and they knew how to put on tefillin, and they knew how to write a mezuzah, and it all came all the way back from Moshe Rabbeinu. But when we learn Mishnayos, we learn about the halachas of mezuzah and the halachas of tefillin because Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Tarfon, etc., they tell us what the halachas are. We rarely go have a transmission that we can go all the way back and say this was said in the first Beis Hamikdash, although they knew it. Rabbi Akiva teaches us how to put on tefillin, and we know it goes all the way back, but we don't have a direct quote from someone in the first Beis Hamikdash who said something. So here we have Dorash Zeh Medrash Dorash Yehoyada Kohen Gadol. How do I know that all these boxes should end up going as a korban ola? This comes from a drasha of Yehoyada Kohen Gadol in the first Beis Hamikdash. The pasuk in Vayikra, he's quoting a pasuk now. It says, Osham hu, Oshoim, Osham Lashem. It says the word Osham in one version or another 3 times in the pasuk. Osham hu, Oshoim, Osham Lashem. That's the pasuk. So Yehoyada Kohen Gadol had a difficulty with this pasuk. It says Osham hu. This offering is an Osham. Okay. If it's an asham, it has the rules of an asham. What are the rules of an asham? The rules of an asham, it's Kodesh Kodashim. Certain people have to bring an asham because of certain sins. It's not a korban chatas, it's slightly different. It's an asham. When you bring a korban asham, part of the animal is consumed on the mizbeach, and part of the animal is eaten by the kohen. Okay, so the pasuk says asham hu. The specific offering that the Torah spoke about in the psukim right before this pasuk. The pasuk now says that offering is an asham, and if it's an asham, the kohen eats, and everything else is consumed on the mizbeach. Fine. Then the pasuk continues and says asham lashem. It's an asham that's for Hashem. It's like an olam. It's all for Hashem. So what is this korban? Yehoyada Kohen Gadol asked. Is it an asham hu, a regular asham, in which the kohen can eat? Or is it an asham lashem? It's a asham that's completely consumed for the Ribono Shel Olam. Which is this? So he said, Kol shehu ba mishum chet umishum ashma. What the pasuk means is asham hu. We have to find a way that we're going to create a situation for this particular asham, where some of it is going to be for the Kohen, and some of it is going to be for the Ribono Shel Olam, because we have two extremes. It's an asham that the Kohen eats, and it's an asham lashem where the Kohen doesn't eat. So which one is it? So he said, Kol shehu ba mishum chet umishum ashma. Any carbon that is brought because of a chet or because of an ashma, and you have extra money left over, what do you do once you've bought your chatas or you bought your asham? You lakach ba'olos. This pasuk is teaching me that you buy olos with it, because now you have no problem with the contradiction. Asham hu, it's coming for a sin, and therefore it's an asham. But this is a special kind of asham. It's coming from the leftover money of an asham. And therefore asham hu. And some of it has to go to the kohen. What will go to the kohen? The hides, like an olah. Asham lashem, the rest of the animal will be consumed on the mizbeach for Hashem, like an olah. The only way to do this is through spending the extra money on an olah. Habasa lashem, because we're going to convert the extra money into an olah, the pasuk now makes sense. The pasuk is not talking about the actual asham. The actual asham, the kohen eats, and the rest of it's consumed on the mizbeach. Because of the two extreme contradictory positions in the pasuk, the other Kohen Gadol said, we're now talking about the extra money that's left over for a chatas and an asham. And what are we going to do with that extra money? We're going to buy an olah with it. And that will satisfy both extremes. It's an asham hu. It's like a korban asham where the kohen should get something, but instead of getting meat to eat, he's going to get hides. Asham lashem, God's going to get it like an olah. Everything else is going to be consumed. So what do we do with the extra money? We're going to buy an olah. Habasa lashem, the meat is going to go on the mizbeach for Hashem. The oros lakohanim, and the hides will go to the kohen. How are we going to do this? By taking the extra money and buying an olah. Nimtzu shnei ksuvim kayamim. Now, both parts of the pasuk stand. They're not contradictory anymore. What's in Techina Chet and an Asham? That's I don't know how to do that. There's something called a chatas is when someone violates Shabbos b'shogeg. A chatas is for aveirus, that a person, those aveirus in the Torah for which a person, if he does it, b'meis it, he's chayev misa or chorus. Person machal Shabbos b'shogeg. B'meis it, he's chayev misa. If he does it b'shogeg, he has to bring a korban chatas. Anything for which there's a misa or chorus b'shogeg, a person brings a korban chatas. An asham has nothing to do with this. There's something called, for example, an asham nazir, an asham mitzayra. These are karbanas that are called asham, and there's some kind of sin related to them, but they're special. There's an asham nazir, an asham mitzayra, asham shifra charufa. There are special cases for certain kind of sins, and these are sins, quote unquote sins, that are done b'mezid. There's no such thing as a korban chatas that you bring for something you did on purpose. There's no such korban chatas. A korban chatas is a shogeg for something you would be chayav misa or chorus. An asham has specific cases, none of which are really chatas cases, and a person brings an asham even if what he did was intentional. Nimtzu shnei ksuvim kayomim. So therefore we have now both extreme parts of the pasuk stand. Asham lashem, it's an asham for Hashem because the whole animal is consumed. For asham lakahan, and it's going to also be an asham for the kohen because he's going to get the hides. How do we do this? Because we're going to take the leftover money and we're going to make it into an ola. For Omer, and now this was the drasha of Yehoyada Kohen Gadol on the pasuk in Vayikra. Yehoyada was learning the pasuk in Vayikra. Now we're going to bring down a pasuk in Malachim, and this pasuk Malachim is specifically about Yehoyada. And we're going to see that Yehoyada is the one that did this. The Omer, it says in Malachim Beis, Perek Yud Beis, pasuk Yud Zayim, Kesef Osham, the Kesef Chataos, Lo Yuva Beis Hashem, La Kohanim Yiyu. Very difficult pasuk to understand. This is part of a perek in Malachim where it's discussing rehabbing, so to speak, the first Beis Hamikdash. The first Beis Hamikdash had fallen into disrepair, and they were making takonas how to collect money and how to rehab the first Beis Hamikdash. And Yehoyada was alive then. And the pasuk says, Kesef Osham, the money for an Osham, the Kesef Chatos, and the money for Korban Chatos, Lo Yuva Beis Hashem, should not be brought, quote unquote, to the house of God. La Kohanim Yiyu, the money should go to a Kohen. Now, it's clear, we all understand that if somebody said, this is the money I'm designating to buy a Korban Chatos, that money goes for a Korban Chatos. If someone says, this is the money designated for a Korban Osham, that money is going to go to a Korban Osham. So there's no meaning to the literal words here. The money of an Osham and the money of the Chatos do not come to Beis Hashem. Do not, so to speak, go on the altar. I mean, they don't go on the altar. Of course it has to go on the altar. It's money that was designated for Chatos and for an Osham. The meaning of the pasuk is Kesef Osham v'Chetef Kesef Chatois, the leftover money that's from a Osham, the leftover money from a Chatos, Lo Yuva Beis Hashem, La Kohanim Yiyu. It's no longer going to be used for a Chatos and an Osham. The money is going to also be, the leftover money is La Kohanim Yiyu. How is it going to be for the Kohen? It's going to be for the Kohen because we're going to buy an Ola with it, and the Kohen will get the hide, and the rest of it will go on the Mizbeach Lashem. And so we have two psukim here. One is Yehoyada HaKohen was troubled with the pasuk in Vayikra, and therefore he said the pasuk in Vayikra must mean that leftover money is going to be used for an Ola, and therefore the Kohen is going to get the hide, and everything else will be consumed on the Mizbeach. This is what Yehoyada had as a drasha for a pasuk in Vayikra. And now the Mishnah quotes a second pasuk in Malachim. Yehoyada himself instituted this rule in the first Beis Hamikdash. So based upon his understanding of the pasuk in Vayikra, the first pasuk in the Mishnah, he instituted this very rule in the Beis Hamikdash when he was alive and in charge. That's Mishnah Vov. Okay, let's take a look now. As I mentioned, we're going to take a pause with Bli Neder, Be'ezrat Hashem. Mashiach's going to come, Be'emunah Shalema, and we're going to make a siyum with him on Shekalim. But we're going to Bli Neder make a siyum on Shekalim. We're going to take a pause for a little while to help us learn some things about Rosh Hashanah, specifically the Tefillah of Rosh Hashanah. So beginning tomorrow morning, the shir will begin at 10. And that will include, there'll be an email, that will include Tuesday as well. We'll start at 10. And we're going to be learning about Rosh Hashanah and the Tefillah of Rosh Hashanah. We'll continue taking a look at some Das Tavunos, basically through the Ramchal's explanation of the Machzor, which I will scan for everyone. We'll continue looking at a piece of Rambam Hilchos Tshuva.